In a small New Jersey diner, single mother Elena struggles through another exhausting shift, balancing survival with caring for her shy 6-year-old son, Jamie. One late night, a stranger enters, polished, dangerous, magnetic. Jamie's innocent mistake of calling him Daddy shatters the fragile normalcy of Elena's life, setting into motion a chain of events neither of them could have foreseen. The fluorescent lights of Mary Ann's diner buzzed with the familiar tiredness of a place that never slept. Grease clung to the air, coffee poured like water, and the vinyl seats had stories written into every crack and tear. For Elena Carter, it was both her cage and her salvation. The place that paid the bills, kept a roof over her son's head, and reminded her daily of the life she'd never quite escaped. She moved between tables with her practiced smile, one she had learned to wear like armor. It fooled customers, her boss, even her friends. But not Jamie. Her little boy always seemed to see through it, those wide hazel eyes following her every move from the corner booth where he sat with his coloring book, his legs swinging, because they still couldn't reach the floor. It was nearly 9 p.m., long past the hour when most children should be home, tucked into bed. But for Eleanor, evenings were work, and Jamie had grown used to the ritual of crayons, pancakes at odd hours, and dozing against the cracked pleather of booth number 7. The bell above the door jingled, snapping Eleanor's attention toward the entrance. A man walked in. Not just a man, someone who seemed to draw the very air into his orbit. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that didn't belong in this greasy spoon. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw cut sharp, his presence impossible to ignore. He moved slowly, as though the diner and everyone in it belonged to him the second he stepped inside. Elena's stomach tightened. People like him didn't come here. Not unless they had a reason. He slid into a corner booth, not asking for a menu, not even looking around, just waiting. His eyes, black as midnight glass, followed her when she finally forced herself over with pad and pen in hand. "What can I get you?" she asked, steadying her voice, though something about his gaze made her feel both exposed and cornered. "Coffee. Black," he said. His voice was low, steady, commanding. The kind of voice that left no room for refusal. She nodded, scribbled on the pad, though she didn't need to, and turned toward the counter. That was when Jamie, who had been silently doodling, climbed off his seat. He toddled across the diner floor, clutching his coloring book like a shield, his sneakers squeaking against the tiles. "Jamie, honey, stay put," Elena called softly. But he didn't listen. He stopped right in front of the man, looked up at him with those impossibly honest eyes, and then, in a voice that carried through the hushed diner, he said, "Daddy?" The word shattered the air. The man's head tilted. A flicker of surprise crossed his otherwise unreadable face. He looked at Jamie, really looked, and for the first time since walking in, his cold demeanor cracked, just a hairline fracture. Eleanor's heart dropped. Heat rushed to her face. "Jamie!" She hurried over, pulling her son gently but firmly back to her side. "I'm so sorry, he didn't mean that." Her throat tightened around the words, but Jamie tugged at her hand stubbornly. "Mommy, he looks like Daddy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to stall. The man's gaze shifted from the child to Elena, pinning her in place. It was not anger exactly, but something sharper. Curiosity, edged with danger. "I see," he said finally, and there was something unreadable in his tone, like he was filing away information she couldn't afford him to have. Eleanor forced a strained laugh. "Kids say the darndest things, right? Let's get you that coffee." She whisked Jamie back to their booth, her hands trembling. Her son looked confused, a little hurt by her urgency, but she couldn't explain. She couldn't tell him that the man he had just called Daddy was the kind of man people whispered about in back alleys, the kind of man her boss warned her to stay away from if she ever valued her life. She brought him the coffee, her hand brushing the cup against the saucer a little too hard. He watched her every move, and she realized he hadn't stopped looking at her since the moment Jamie spoke. Finally he said, "What's your name?" "Eleanor," she answered, hesitating. "And you are?" He let the silence stretch just long enough for her pulse to thrum painfully. Then, "Vincenzo." She almost dropped the pot in her hand. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that name. Vincenzo Moretti, the Moretti family. Whispers of extortion, violence, disappearances. The Mafia's shadow that hung over New Jersey like a storm cloud, and her son had just called him Daddy. Jamie peeked over the booth at him again, smiling shyly, And Vincenzo, the man she'd only ever heard of as a monster in rumors, allowed the faintest twitch of a smile in return. Elena's breath caught, because that tiny smile was not cold, not cruel. It was something else, something human. But that terrified her even more, because nothing about this man belonged in her world. And yet, as the night dragged on and Vincenzo stayed in his booth long after his coffee cooled, Elena had the strangest, most frightening feeling that the slip of her son's tongue had just opened a door she wouldn't be able to close. The diner should have gone back to normal. That's what Elena told herself. One night, one mistake. Jamie's innocent slip should have meant nothing. But the name, Vincenzo Moretti, had carved itself into her thoughts, and the weight of his dark eyes lingered long after he had left. And then he came back. 3 nights later, just as the clock neared 10, the bell above the door jingled again. Elena felt it before she saw him. The hush that swept through the regulars, the way even the line cook at the griddle stiffened. Vincenzo walked in as if he owned not only the diner, but the space inside her chest that quickened whenever he entered. Jamie was coloring again at their usual booth. He looked up, spotted Vincenzo, and his face lit with an excitement that made Elena's stomach knot. He waved. "Hi." To her horror, Vincenzo gave a small nod of acknowledgement, almost like a secret shared only between them. He took his seat in the corner again, and Elena had no choice but to serve him. "Black coffee?" she asked, her tone clipped, rehearsed. His eyes lifted to hers. "You remember." Of course she remembered. She hated that she did. She poured the coffee, but before she could retreat, he said, "Your boy, Jamie, isn't it?" Her hand froze around the pot. "You don't need to know his name." A flicker of something, not quite amusement, not quite offense, crossed his face. "Relax. I'm not here for trouble." He leaned back, his presence radiating that same strange gravity. "But children don't lie, Elena. Not the way adults do. He saw something in me, and you're acting like that frightens you more than anything." Her pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to snap at him, tell him to leave them alone. But the way he said her name, as if he'd tasted it, claimed it, made her words die in her throat. Jamie scrambled out of the booth again before she could stop him. He marched right up to Vincenzo, clutching a page from his coloring book. "Look, I made a race car." Elena's breath caught, waiting for the man to dismiss him. But instead, Vincenzo took the paper carefully as though it were a fragile artifact. He studied the uneven crayon lines. "Red car. Fast," he said, his voice softer than Elena thought possible. Jamie grinned. "Like Lightning McQueen." Vincenzo's lips curved, almost imperceptibly. "Exactly." The sight nearly undid her. The most dangerous man in the city, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, speaking gently to her son about cartoons. It was absurd. Impossible. And yet, it felt like something her boy had been starved of, a father's attention. She pulled Jamie back, her hands trembling. "That's enough. Go finish your pancakes." Jamie pouted but obeyed. Vincenzo watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he asked, "Where's his real father?" The question cut through her like glass. Her mouth went dry. "Not here," she said flatly. But ghosts rose unbidden. A man's angry voice. Shattered glass. The smell of whiskey on breath that had whispered promises before turning to fists. She pushed it down, burying the memory deep where it belonged. Vincenzo studied her, and she hated the feeling that he saw more than she wanted to reveal. "Some men don't deserve the titles they're given," he said finally, almost as if speaking to himself. She didn't reply. She couldn't, because for the first time she caught a flicker of something in his gaze that wasn't menace. It was loneliness. Still, she forced herself to retreat, to bury herself in work, to remind herself of who he was. Vincenzo Moretti, a name that came with blood on its hands, a name people whispered when bodies turned up in the river. And yet he kept coming back, once a week, then twice. Always sitting in the same booth, always ordering the same coffee. Sometimes Jamie would sneak him drawings. Sometimes Vincenzo would leave $100 bills tucked under the saucer, tips that made Elena's pride burn as hot as her fear. She told herself to ignore him, to treat him like any other customer, but she couldn't. Not when her son's eyes brightened whenever Vincenzo walked in, not when she began to realize that Vincenzo was watching them, not with hunger, but with something far more dangerous, yearning. And outside the diner, Eleanor began to notice shadows. One night after closing, she saw a black SUV idling across the street, headlights off, a silhouette inside smoking. The next evening, as she walked Jamie home, a man in a leather jacket lingered on the opposite sidewalk, pretending to check his phone, but glancing their way too often. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, rival crews sniffing around, tensions rising in Moretti territory, and Elena knew, without a doubt, that her son's innocent mistake had drawn them into a world they had no business touching. Still, when Vincenzo walked her to the door one late shift, Jamie asleep against her shoulder, Elena didn't stop him. His presence was both comfort and threat, like a storm cloud shielding her from the rain even as it promised lightning. "You should be careful," he murmured as she fumbled for her keys. Her throat tightened. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" His gaze held hers, intense, searching. "Both." And then he turned and walked into the night, leaving her standing there with the echo of his words, and the terrifying realization that shadows weren't just following Vincenzo anymore. They were following her. The leaves outside the diner had started to turn, flecks of red and gold drifting across the sidewalks, though Eleanor barely noticed the season changing. What she noticed were the shadows. The SUV was back, sometimes parked across the street, sometimes down the block, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside, and the man in the leather jacket had become a fixture, leaning against lampposts, pretending to smoke while his gaze swept the diner windows like a predator marking prey. Elena tried to tell herself it was her imagination, that this was just city paranoia, but then the back door of the diner was found ajar one morning, though the lock was never broken. One of the cooks swore he saw a man slip out of the alley the night before. Vincenzo had stopped pretending. He came in with two men in suits now, shadows of his own, who never ordered food but kept their hands tucked inside their jackets. When Jamie ran to show him his latest drawing, those men scanned the room first like a child's crayons might conceal a gun. Elena hated it, hated how the diner, her sanctuary, had become something else, a chessboard in someone else's war. But she hated even more the way Vincenzo's presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. That night the diner was quieter than usual. Rain streaked down the windows in steady lines, the sound a lullaby of unease. Vincenzo sat in his booth, untouched coffee in front of him, eyes fixed on her. "Why do you keep coming here?" Eleanor asked finally, her voice sharper than intended. He leaned back, studying her. "Why do you keep serving me?" She froze. He had a way of turning her own defenses against her, stripping her bare without lifting a finger. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, glancing at Jamie asleep against the booth seat. "Whatever game you're playing, don't drag us into it. This isn't a game." His tone was so low, so certain it made her chest ache. "Your boy. He sees me. And you—" His words caught, uncharacteristically faltering. "You look at me like I'm not a monster." She wanted to deny it, to tell him that's exactly what she saw, but the truth was more complicated, and that terrified her most of all. Before she could answer, the bell over the door jingled. A man stepped inside, not one of Vincenzo's. This man was different, rougher, with an old leather jacket, dark eyes that swept the diner before locking onto her. Eleanor's breath turned to stone. It couldn't be, but it was. "Mark," she whispered. Jamie's father. The man who had vanished 6 years ago, leaving her with bruises and debts and a newborn to raise alone. The man who had sworn he'd never be a father, then proved it with his fists and his absence. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, tinged with something like disbelief. His gaze flicked toward Jamie, and something ugly flashed in his eyes. "That's him, huh?" Her entire body went cold. Vincenzo rose from his booth in one smooth, silent motion. His men followed, tension slicing the air. "How you know this man?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. Elena's throat constricted. She couldn't answer. Not here. Not in front of Jamie. Mark smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't know you'd upgraded to whatever this is." His gaze slid to Vincenzo, but there was no fear in it, only provocation. "Leave," Vincenzo said simply. The word was a command, not a suggestion. Mark didn't move. "I came for my son." The diner went deathly silent. Elena's knees threatened to give out. She clutched the counter for balance. "You don't get to say that," she hissed. "You lost that right years ago." Mark stepped closer, and the years peeled away. She could almost feel his hand clamping around her wrist, his voice spitting venom. She flinched, though he hadn't touched her. Vincenzo stepped between them, his towering presence swallowing the space. "You heard her. Leave." The temperature in the diner shifted. Mark glanced at Vincenzo again, but this time something in his expression faltered, just for a heartbeat. He muttered something under his breath and stormed back out into the rain, the door slamming behind him. Elena's breath came in shallow bursts. Her hands shook. Jamie stirred, rubbing his eyes, sensing the tension but too young to understand it. "Mommy? Who was that?" he asked sleepily. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to his hair. "Nobody, baby. Just nobody." But Vincenzo's gaze told her he knew better. After the diner closed, he waited as she wiped down the counters, Jamie asleep again in the booth. "That man, he was trouble before, wasn't he?" Vincenzo asked softly. Elena swallowed hard. "He was Jamie's father. He left us, that's all you need to know." But Vincenzo didn't look away. Men like him don't just leave. They come back when it suits them, and they don't come back alone. The weight of his words pressed down on her, because she knew he was right. Mark's sudden return wasn't chance, it was a warning, a shadow from her past reappearing, just as shadows from Vincenzo's world closed in. And for the first time, Elena realized something chilling. Her past and Vincenzo's present weren't separate storms. They were converging, and she and Jamie were standing in the center. Rain washed the streets clean, but inside Elena's chest, the storm only worsened. After Mark's sudden return, the world felt tilted, unstable. She couldn't escape the memory of his stare, the claim in his voice when he said he'd come for his son. For years she had imagined him gone for good, swallowed by his vices, another ghost of her past. But ghosts never stayed buried, and in his absence, another presence had taken root. Vincenzo Moretti. He hadn't left her side since that night, hovering close in a way that should have unnerved her. But instead, his nearness carried a strange, disorienting comfort. When Jamie laughed at one of Vincenzo's rare dry remarks, when she caught him watching her with that steady, unreadable gaze, something in her softened in ways she hadn't let herself in years. That terrified her most of all. One late evening, long after the diner closed, Elena found herself scrubbing the same countertop over and over, lost in thought. Vincenzo leaned against the doorway, his jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up in a way that made him look less untouchable, more human. "You'll rub a hole in that counter if you keep going," he said. She startled, realizing her hand was trembling. She set the rag down. "I can't seem to stop moving. If I stop, I'll start thinking." He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Thinking isn't always the enemy. It is when your past won't stay in the past. Her voice cracked before she could stop it. Vincenzo was silent for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he said, "You're not the only one haunted." She turned, meeting his gaze. And for the first time she saw it. Not just menace, not just power, but grief. A weight he carried like a shadow stitched to his skin. "My father was the first monster I ever knew," Vincenzo said quietly, his accent deepening, as if memory pulled him back to another time. "A man who ruled with fists, who thought fear was love. I swore I would never become him, but every day I wake up and see his reflection in the world I've built." Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to confess anything, let alone this. "You're not him," she said softly. His jaw flexed. "Aren't I? People fear me. They obey me. Blood has been spilled in my name. You don't survive where I come from without becoming the thing you swore to kill." The rawness in his voice pierced her. Against her better judgment, she reached out, fingers brushing his hand where it rested on the counter. His skin was warm, solid. His eyes flickered to their joined touch, then back to her as if the smallest gesture had undone him. "Elena," he whispered, her name a plea. She should have pulled away. Instead, she stood there, their hands tangled in silence, heavy with all the things they weren't supposed to feel. The sound of a chair scraping broke the moment. Jamie had stirred awake in his booth, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy!" His voice was groggy, small. Eleanor jerked back, guilt flooding her. Vincenzo straightened instantly, the mask of composure sliding back into place. But Jamie blinked at them, then padded over. He climbed into Vincenzo's lap without hesitation, curling against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elena froze, waiting for Vincenzo to push him away. Instead, the Mafia boss, the man people whispered about in terror, wrapped an arm around Jamie with startling gentleness. "Bad dream?" he asked quietly. Jamie nodded, eyes already drooping again. "Monsters." Vincenzo's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. "Then you don't have to worry. I don't let monsters near my family." Eleanor's heart lurched. My family. He had said it without hesitation. Jamie's breathing steadied, his small body limp with sleep against Vincenzo's chest. Elena watched, her throat aching, as Vincenzo held him like something precious, something breakable. "You can't say things like that," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He'll believe you. He'll think you're staying." Vincenzo's eyes met hers, dark and unwavering. "Maybe I should." The words hit her like a strike, because a part of her, the part that longed for someone to stand between her and the world, the part that dreamed of Jamie having a father who would never leave, wanted him to. But another part knew the truth. His world was blood and shadows didn't spare children. She forced the words out, though they tasted like ash. "You'll destroy us." For once, Vincenzo didn't argue. He only looked at her with an expression so raw it unsettled her more than his power ever had. The silence between them felt fragile, suspended, and in that moment, Elena realized something she had tried desperately to deny. She wasn't just afraid of Vincenzo Moretti, she was afraid of how much she wanted him. The illusion of peace didn't last. The very next morning, as she walked Jamie to school, a black car slowed to a crawl beside them. The window rolled down. Mark's face appeared, eyes sharp, lips curled into a sneer. "Thought about what I said?" he called. Eleanor froze, clutching Jamie's hand tighter. "Go away." But Mark only smirked. "This isn't over. You think that gangster can protect you? He can't protect anyone forever. And when he falls, you'll fall with him." The car sped off, leaving exhaust and dread in its wake. Elena stood there, trembling, Jamie looking up at her with wide, worried eyes. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, that the monsters in his dreams weren't real, but the truth was far worse. The monsters were very real, and one of them had just promised to come back. The night the betrayal happened began like any other. The diner was almost empty, the neon sign outside flickering weakly against the glass. Elena wiped down the counter, grateful for the rare quiet. Jamie was in the corner booth again, curled up with his blanket and a comic book, eyes heavy with sleep. For a moment, she let herself imagine this was ordinary, that the man who had been haunting her nights, watching her days, didn't exist, that Vincenzo wasn't out there somewhere, pulling strings in a world soaked with violence. But illusions don't last long when you're standing on a fault line. The bell over the door jingled, and Elena looked up. Relief softened her shoulders when she saw Detective Harris step inside. He was a regular, middle-aged, graying hair, always polite. He'd been eating at the diner for years, a quiet presence that made her feel safer somehow. "Evening, Elena," he said, sliding onto a stool. "Smells good in here, as always." She smiled faintly. "Coffee?" "Always." As she poured his cup, he lowered his voice. "You've got eyes on you more than usual, you notice?" Her hand froze on the pot. "What do you mean?" "2 cars, across the street. Men who don't look like they're here for pancakes." He studied her face. "You need to be careful, Eleanor. Being near Moretti paints a target on you, and your boy." Fear gripped her chest, but before she could respond, the bell chimed again. This time it wasn't Harris's quiet presence. It was a group of men, 3 of them. Hard faces, leather jackets, eyes scanning the diner like they owned it. Elena's pulse spiked. She recognized one of them, the man in the leather jacket who'd been watching her for weeks. They slid into a booth, not ordering, not speaking, just watching. Harris leaned closer, his tone urgent. "They're not here for the food. Get your kid, take him home now." She nodded, throat tight. She moved to Jamie, shaking his shoulder gently. "Baby, wake up. We're going home." But as she reached for his hand, a voice stopped her. "Going somewhere?" The man in the leather jacket stood, blocking the exit. His companions rose with him, flanking the door. Her stomach dropped. "Sit back down," the man said. His tone was calm, but deadly. Harris reached for his badge, his hand slipping beneath his coat. But before he could move further, one of the men drew a gun, pressing it against his ribs. "Don't!" Elena's breath caught. Jamie clung to her leg, sensing the danger, even if he didn't understand it. The leather-jacketed man smirked. "You've got something we want, or rather someone." His eyes flicked toward Jamie. Cute kid. Looks like his daddy. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Hey, you stay away from him," she snapped, pulling Jamie closer. The man's smirk widened. "Relax. We don't hurt kids, unless we need to send a message." Before she could respond, the bell chimed again. This time it was Vincenzo. He stepped inside like a storm given human form, his 2 men at his back, guns already visible. His eyes swept the scene once, Harris pinned by a gun, Elena clutching Jamie, the rival crew blocking the exit, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Let them go," Vincenzo said. His voice was low, steady, a blade sheathed but ready. The leather-jacketed man laughed. "Moretti, we've been waiting for you. Word is you've gone soft, spending your nights in diners, playing house with a waitress and her brat." His gaze flicked to Elena. "She worth starting a war over?" Elena's heart hammered. All eyes turned to Vincenzo. He didn't flinch. "She's worth ending one for." The room froze. The rival men shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering under the weight of his words. But the leader forced a laugh, stepping closer. "Then let's test how far you'll go." The moment shattered into chaos. One of Vincenzo's men drew, shots cracking through the diner. Plates shattered, glass rained down. Eleanor threw herself over Jamie, shielding him as the booth splintered. Harris lunged, grappling the gun at his ribs. And in the middle of it all, Vincenzo moved like something out of myth. Precise, brutal, unflinching. Within seconds, 2 of the rival men were down, the third scrambling for the exit with blood on his shoulder. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Jamie's frightened sobs. Eleanor clutched him, her body shaking. Vincenzo crouched beside them, his hand brushing Jamie's hair gently, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "It's okay. You're safe now." But Elena's eyes locked on the door where the last man had fled. Safe? No, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And then she saw something that made her blood run colder than the gunfire. Detective Harris stood, breathing hard, holstering his weapon. But his eyes weren't on the downed men. They were on Vincenzo. And they weren't just wary. They were calculating. A chill spread through her. Harris wasn't just a cop who came for coffee. He knew more than he let on. And in his gaze she saw the truth. Harris wasn't here to protect her. He was watching her, watching Vincenzo. She didn't know yet if he was the enemy, but betrayal had already slipped into her world. The diner was gone. Not in the literal sense. The building still stood, neon sign buzzing weakly in the night. But after the gunfight, after blood stained the checkerboard floor and whispers spread across the neighborhood, Mary Ann's was no longer a place of safety. It was a battlefield marked in shadows, and Elena knew the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering. Vincenzo hadn't said much in the days that followed. His men shadowed her every move, escorts that made the neighbors whisper. He ordered them to walk Jamie to school, to sit outside the apartment at night. It should have comforted her. Instead, it only confirmed what she feared. They weren't bystanders anymore. They were targets. The night it all broke open, Elena couldn't sleep. Rain lashed the windows of her small apartment. Jamie dreamed restlessly beside her, murmuring fragments about monsters and heroes. A knock rattled the door. 3 sharp raps. Her heart lurched. "Elena!" A voice. Familiar. Detective Harris. She cracked the door, chain still in place. His face was pale, wet from the storm. "You need to come with me. Now. They're coming for you. For the boy." Fear spiked through her, but something in his eyes made her pause. Not urgency. Calculation. "What do you mean?" she demanded. Before he could answer, another sound rose. The squeal of tires, the slam of car doors. Men shouting below in the street. Vincenzo's men, and others. Rival voices, harder, crueler. The war had found them. The building shuddered as a door downstairs was kicked in. Eleanor yanked Jamie awake, clutching him to her chest. Harris pushed at the door. "Let me in. I can get you out." But behind him, another figure emerged from the shadows of the stairwell. Mark. Her blood ran cold. He smirked, soaked from the rain, his eyes glinting with something between triumph and madness. "Told you I'd be back for him." His gaze slid to Jamie, clinging to her side. "My son." "No." Her scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Vincenzo's voice thundered from below. "Elena!" Gunfire erupted. Shouts. Chaos spiraled upward like smoke. She slammed the door shut, locking it, backing away, as Jamie cried into her side. Harris pounded from outside. "Open up, Elena. You don't know what you're dealing with." The next moment, the door exploded inward, splintering. Harris stumbled inside, his badge flashing useless in the chaos. But it wasn't her he went for. It was Vincenzo, because Vincenzo was already there, storming up the stairs with fire in his eyes, his gun raised. "Move," he growled at Harris. And that's when Elena understood. Harris wasn't here to save them. He was here to trap Vincenzo. "FBI's been building a case on you for years," Harris spat, his gun swinging between them. "And you just walked into it." Vincenzo didn't flinch. "You think I care about your case? You threaten her. You threaten the boy. You're already a dead man." The room became a standoff, thunder and gunfire outside punctuating the silence. Then Mark lunged. He shoved Harris aside, grabbing Jamie's arm with brutal force. "He's mine! You can't take him from me!" Jamie screamed. Eleanor launched herself forward, clawing at Mark's arm. "Let him go." Vincenzo moved faster than her eyes could follow. One shot. The crack split the air. Mark crumpled, eyes wide, blood blooming across his chest. Jamie broke free, sobbing into Elena's arms. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Harris roared, raising his gun at Vincenzo. But Vincenzo was quicker. 2 shots echoed. Harris collapsed, his body sprawled across the broken doorframe, eyes glassy with shock. The storm inside the apartment fell into eerie quiet, broken only by Jamie's sobs and Elena's ragged breathing. Vincenzo lowered his gun, his chest heaving. His eyes found hers, dark, haunted, burning with something fierce and unyielding. "It's over," he said. But even as he spoke, they both knew it wasn't. The war outside raged on, Moretti men clashing with rivals in the rain. But inside that small apartment, a different battle had been decided. Vincenzo had chosen, not his empire, not his survival. Them. Elena pressed her face into Jamie's hair, holding him as tightly as she could. When she looked up again, tears blurred her vision. "You killed him," she whispered, voice breaking. "I saved him," Vincenzo said. His gaze softened, just enough. "I'll always save him." Something in her broke then, the last fragile wall she had built between them, because she realized in that moment that whatever else he was, a monster, criminal, killer, Vincenzo Moretti had chosen to protect her son as his own, even if it meant damning himself. By dawn, the war had spilled back into the streets. Cars burned, sirens wailed, bodies were dragged away. Elena sat on the apartment floor, Jamie asleep in her lap, his small hand clutching hers. Vincenzo stood by the window, blood on his shirt, shadows under his eyes. When he finally turned to her, he looked like a man who had already lost everything, except what sat in her arms. "I can't stay," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. "Then why did you come at all?" His gaze lingered on Jamie, then on her. "Because I had to know what it felt like, to be something other than the monster, to be a father." Her throat closed. Tears slipped hot down her cheeks. He stepped closer, crouching, brushing his hand gently against Jamie's hair. Then he looked at her, his voice raw. "You asked me once if I'd destroy you. Maybe I already have. But remember this, I would burn my whole world to ash before I let anyone touch him." Then he stood, straightened, walked into the smoke-filled dawn without looking back. Elena pressed her face into Jamie's hair, her heart breaking and mending all at once, because she knew the truth. Vincenzo had left them with more than danger. He had left them with hope. Hope that even in the darkest places love could be found, and that maybe, just maybe, the monsters weren't the only ones who survived the night.